a mighty conqueror shaped Central Asia with fire and steel. Yet centuries later, his descendant would cross mountains and rivers to forge a new empire. This is the story of Timur's bloodline and Boba's dream. The wind swept across the arid steppes of Central Asia, carrying dust and the echoes of marching armies. In the late 14th century, Timur, the fierce conqueror known as Tamerlane, carved an empire from Samarkand to Baghdad, leaving cities in flames and monuments in his name. His victories were not just military, they were a declaration of dynasty. Timur married strategically, linking his family to Mongol royal bloodlines, and ensured that his descendants would inherit both prestige and the weight of his empire. Among those descendants, centuries later, was a boy born in 1483 in the fortress city of Fergana, Zahiruddin Muhammad, later known as Baba. Baba was Timur's direct descendant through his father, Umarshek Mirza Dua, the ruler of Fergana, a principality once part of Timur's fractured empire. On his mother's side, Baba also carried the blood of Genghis Khan, giving him both Timurid and Mongol lineage. He was the living embodiment of the Timurid dynasty, a thread connecting centuries of conquest, ambition, and empire building. Baba's world was nothing like the vast territories his ancestor had commanded. Timur's empire had fractured into multiple competing principalities, each ruled by ambitious princes. Fergana Baba's inheritance was small, surrounded by powerful neighbors and constantly under threat. Yet the Timurid legacy ran through his veins, urging him toward ambition, resilience, and a vision beyond survival. Even as a boy, Baba felt the weight of Timur's blood, the expectation to claim lands, lead armies, and restore the glory of his lineage. At 12, Baba inherited the throne of Fergana, already steeped in conflict. Provinces were contested, allies fickle, and enemies ruthless. The boy prince learned early that Timur's victories were not automatic. They had to be earned again. He fought to defend his principality, lost it, reclaimed it, and slowly began to understand the art of leadership that had distinguished his ancestor. Every battle he waged, every alliance he forged, echoed the strategies of Timur, though adapted to a much smaller, more fragmented world. But Baba's ambitions could not be contained within Central Asia. He yearned for Samarkand, the jewel of Timur's empire, and later for Kabul, a strategic stronghold. Crossing rugged mountains and enduring harsh winters, Baba's campaigns were a testament to the resilient Timurid spirit. Finally, turning his eyes to India, he carried with him not just armies, but the inherited vision of a dynasty forged by Tit in 1526 at the Battle of Panipit. Baba defeated the Delhi Sultanate, establishing the foundation of the Mughal Empire new chapter in the Timurid story. The continuity is clear. Timur gives successive Timurid princes, gives Umarshek Mirza Dua, gives Baba, gives Mughal Empire. Baba was more than a conqueror. He was the living vessel of centuries of ambition, strategy, and legacy. Where Timur had ruled with fear and fire, Babur ruled with calculated skill, adapting the Timurid vision to the new lands of India. He preserved the dynasty's cultural heritage, blending Central Asian artistry, architecture, and literature with the Indian landscape, ensuring that the Timurid legacy lived on not just in blood, but in empire and culture. The blood of conquerors flows not just through battles, but through generations. Timur's empire may have fragmented, but his spirit endured in Babur Prince, a warrior, a visionary who transformed inheritance into living legacy. The Timurid dynasty reminds us that history is not only built with swords, but with the resilience, vision, and courage carried in the blood of those who dare to dream beyond their time. Born in 1483 in the rugged mountains of Andijan, Babur was a boy of royal blood and fragile beginnings. At just 12, the crown was thrust upon him after his father's death, a kingdom trembling, surrounded by rivals hungry for power. Every night, he stared at the stars and wondered if destiny favored the young and the weak. Every decision was a gamble, every choice a risk of death. The boy who should have played in gardens instead learned to fight for life itself. His world was one of treachery. Allies turned, relatives betrayed. He tasted defeat early, losing cities that had once been his birthright. But with every loss, his ambition only grew. He realized that survival was not enough. He needed a kingdom that no enemy could claim. The stage was set. The lands beyond his mountains whispered of riches and glory. But the journey would demand more than courage. It would demand a ruthless heart and a visionary mind. At 15, Babur's world had already narrowed into battles, betrayals, and blood. He fought rivals across Samarkand and Fergana, gaining and losing thrones with terrifying speed. Each loss cut deeper than the last. Each victory left him exhausted and hunted. In the cold nights, he scribbled poems and poured his sorrow into words, an inner refuge amidst chaos. Yet the fire in his veins would not fade. He looked eastward to the lands of India, where empires were young, cities wealthy, and fortune waited for a bold hand. Every journey was a gamble. Every ally could betray. He learned to trust only his own skill, his own sword, and his own mind. Shadows of doubt haunted him, but ambition pushed him relentlessly forward. The world would know his name, but only if he survived the darkness surrounding him. Crossing mountains and rivers, Babur led a ragged army through lands few dared tread. Heat, hunger, and disease stalked him like ghosts. Every night, campfires flickered over uneasy soldiers, whispering of defeat and fear. Then came the first glimpse of India's vast fertile land under a fragile sultanate. But it was not a gift, it was a battlefield. Here, Babur would face a foe larger, stronger, and entrenched. Victory would not be easy. It would demand innovation, courage, and the cold calculation of a strategist unafraid to use gunpowder and artillery in new ways. The Battle of Panipat was not just a fight. It was a trial by fire. Cannons roared, horses trampled, and the ground shook with human ambition. Barbers. Eyes burned with a mix of fear and determination. The outcome would shape the future of a continent. When the smoke cleared, Babur stood victorious. But conquest was only the first step. The empire he won was fragile, surrounded by enemies eager to reclaim it. Every decision carried weight: administration, loyalty, and survival intertwined. Babur's nights were sleepless, filled with reflection. He wrote in his memoirs about loss, regret, and vision, proving that a conqueror is not only a warrior but also a thinker. His empire grew not through cruelty alone, but through strategy, intelligence, and calculated risk. The boy who had once trembled beneath the crown had become a man capable of shaping history. Yet, even as he built gardens and chronicled his victories, he knew the empire's survival depended on continual vigilance and daring choices. Babur's life ended in 1530, but his empire endured. From exile and defeat, he had forged a dynasty that would rule India for over 3 centuries. His story is not just of battles, but of ambition, resilience, and the human cost of greatness. He taught that destiny is claimed, not inherited, that survival demands courage, strategy, and sometimes ruthless determination, and that even amidst shadows of fear, one can rise to become legend. The final visual: a solitary figure atop a hill, watching the sunrise over an endless land. A whisper in the wind. History remembers the daring, not the cautious. King Humayun did not choose power. Power was handed to him like a sword already stained with blood. The year was 1530. The Mughal Empire, new fragile, and surrounded by enemies, stood at a dangerous crossroads. Babur, the fierce conqueror who carved an empire out of North India, was dead, and in his place stood his son, Nasiruddin Muhammad King Humayun. He was young, intelligent, dreamy, and dangerously unprepared for the storm ahead. The empire he inherited was not secure, it was borrowed time. Afghan nobles plotted rebellion. Rajput kingdoms waited for weakness, and within King Humayun's own family, ambition simmered quietly, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Yet history would not remember King Humayun as a simple failure. It would remember him as the emperor who lost everything: his throne, his pride, his identity, and still returned. And from his struggle would rise a legend greater than himself: King Akbar. This is not just a story of power. It is a story of collapse, exile, and redemption. When Babur died, the crown passed to King Humayun without war, but not without danger. The Mughal Empire was barely 4 years old. Its foundations were weak, its borders unstable, and its loyalty uncertain. King Humayun stepped onto the throne, knowing every decision could either secure the empire or shatter it. Unlike his father, King Humayun was not a ruthless conqueror. He believed in astrology. He trusted fate. He delayed decisions, searching the stars for answers, while enemies moved quickly on the ground. This hesitation proved costly. Rival rulers sensed weakness. After Afghan leaders, once defeated by Babur, began regrouping. Among them was a sharp, disciplined Commander Sher Khan, later known as Sher Shah Suri. King Humayun ruled, but he did not command fear, and in an empire built by the sword, that was fatal. King Humayun's greatest threat was not just outside the empire, it was inside it. His brothers, each ruling provinces, wanted power of their own. Instead of crushing rebellion early, King Humayun forgave. Instead of uniting the empire, he divided it. Meanwhile, Sher Shah Suri rose like a shadow behind the throne. Every delay strengthened Sher Shah. Every mistake weakened King Humayun. The Mughal army lacked discipline. Leadership was divided. Strategy was unclear. Battles were fought without unity, without urgency. King Humayun was not defeated in a single moment. He was slowly undone. By the time he realized the danger, it was already too late. The year 1540 marked the darkest chapter of King Humayun's life. At the battles of Chausa and Kanauj, Sher Shah Suri struck with precision and discipline. King Humayun's forces collapsed. Panic spread. The empire crumbled. Delhi fell, Agra fell. The Mughal throne was lost. King Humayun fled not as an emperor, but as a hunted man. Crossing rivers, deserts, and hostile lands, he escaped with his life, leaving behind the empire he was born to rule. For 15 long years, the Mughal crown disappeared from India. History had erased King Humayun, or so it seemed. Exile is not just distance, it is humiliation. King Humayun wandered through Sindh, Rajasthan, and into Persia. Hunger followed him, fear followed him, doubt followed him like a shadow. Yet exile changed him. In Persia, under the Safavid ruler, King Humayun found something he had never known: structure, discipline, and refined governance. Persian culture reshaped him. Art, administration, military order all became lessons carved by hardship. He was no longer the hesitant prince, guided by stars. He was becoming a survivor. With Persian support, King Humayun gathered an army not just of soldiers, but of purpose. The throne he lost still haunted him, and he was ready to return. In 1555, King Humayun crossed back into India. This time, he moved with certainty. The Surd dynasty, weakened by internal conflict after Sher Shah's death, could not withstand his advance. City by city, the path to Delhi reopened. When King Humayun reclaimed the throne, it was not victory, it was redemption. He had lost everything once. Now he ruled with clarity, born of suffering. But fate, cruel and impatient, had one final twist. Only months after reclaiming his empire, tragedy struck. In his library, surrounded by books and knowledge he loved, King Humayun fell down the steps. The emperor who survived exile, war, and defeat could not escape destiny. He died in 1556. His reign had returned, but his time had ended. King Humayun's greatest achievement was not his victory, but his survival. Because he returned, his son King Akbar inherited a restored empire. Stronger foundations, clearer vision. King Humayun's failures became King Akbar's lessons. History remembers conquerors, but it also remembers those who fall and rise again. King Humayun was not the greatest Mughal emperor, but without him, there would be no King Akbar. History rarely waits for the young. In 1556, India stood on the edge of chaos. The Mughal Empire, built only months earlier by King Humayun, was once again in danger. Its ruler was dead, its enemies were gathering, and its future rested on the shoulders of a 13-year-old boy. His name was King Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. Born into a world of war and exile, King Akbar did not inherit peace. He inherited fear. The throne he sat upon was unstable, surrounded by rivals who believed the empire would crumble under a child ruler. But King Akbar's story is not just about power. It is about ambition shaped by danger, strength forged by loss, and a ruler who learned that conquering hearts could be more powerful than conquering land. This is the story of how a boy king became King Akbar the Great. King Akbar became emperor at an age when most children were still learning the world. His father, King Humayun, had barely reclaimed the Mughal throne before his sudden death. The empire once again stood exposed. Delhi was vulnerable. The army was uncertain, and enemies sensed blood in the air. King Akbar did not rule alone. By his side stood Bairam Khan, a hardened general and loyal guardian. He would guide the young emperor through his earliest and most dangerous years. But even with protection, King Akbar lived under constant threat. Every decision carried the weight of survival. Every battle could decide whether the Mughal name would live or disappear from history. The crown on his head was heavy, and the enemies were already marching. The greatest threat came swiftly. A powerful general named Hemu, serving the Afghan rulers, marched toward Delhi with confidence. He had defeated Mughal forces before he believed the empire would fall easily to a boy. The two armies met at Panipat, the same field where King Akbar's grandfather Babur had once changed history. The battle was fierce. Dust filled the sky. War cries echoed across the plain. For a moment, Mughal defeat seemed certain, but fate turned. Hemu fell, his army collapsed, and the Mughal banner still flew. The Second Battle of Panipat, 1556, secured North India for King Akbar. It was more than a military victory, it was a message. The boy king would not be broken. With survival secured, King Akbar turned to expansion. Campaign by campaign, the Mughal Empire grew. Malwa fell, Gujarat submitted, Bengal was brought under control. Rajput kingdoms were defeated or allied through diplomacy. King Akbar understood something rare for a conqueror. Force alone could not hold an empire. He respected bravery even in enemies. Many Rajput rulers were welcomed into Mughal service, strengthening the empire instead of weakening it through endless rebellion. By the time King Akbar reached adulthood, the Mughal Empire stretched across vast regions of the subcontinent. It was no longer fragile. It was unstoppable. Conquest was only the beginning. King Akbar knew that empires fall not from invasion, but from disorder. He created a centralized administration, dividing the empire into subas provinces, each carefully governed. He reformed the land revenue system, ensuring fairness and stability for farmers and the state alike. Officials were chosen for talent, not birth. For the first time, the Mughal Empire was not just powerful, it was organized. King Akbar was no longer just a warrior king, he was a builder. In an age of division, King Akbar chose unity. He abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims. He invited scholars of different religions to debate and discuss ideas openly. He believed understanding was stronger than fear. This was dangerous. Many opposed him. Some saw tolerance as weakness. But King Akbar believed that an empire divided by belief could never truly stand. His rule became a symbol of coexistence in a violent age. King Akbar's court became legendary. Artists, musicians, poets, and thinkers flourished. His Navatna's 9 gems, including Birbal and Tanzambi, became symbols of wisdom and creativity. Persian elegance merged with Indian tradition, creating a culture that defined Mughal greatness. The empire was not only feared, it was admired. King Akbar could not read, but he listened. He was brave, curious, and deeply thoughtful. He judged people by loyalty and ability, not religion or birth. He had known fear as a child, and that fear shaped his strength as a ruler. King Akbar died in 1605. He left behind an empire strong, united, and stable, ready for future generations. His rule became the gold standard for Mughal governance. He was not just a conqueror, he was a unifier. From a frightened boy on a dangerous throne to a ruler remembered as King Akbar the Great. Some men conquer the world, others inherit it and must prove they deserve it. In 1605, the Mughal Empire stood at its height. Its borders stretched across much of the Indian subcontinent. Its wealth dazzled the world, and its architect, Akbar the Great, was gone. In his place rose his son, Nur-ad-Din Muhammad, King Jahangir. But King Jahangir's path to the throne was stained with doubt. Years earlier, he had rebelled against his own father, hungry for power before his time. Though forgiven, the memory lingered like a scar. Now crowned emperor, King Jahangir faced a question history would not ignore. Could the son of Akbar rule without becoming a tyrant or a failure? This is the story of a ruler who chose justice over conquest, culture over chaos, and order over ambition, even as the greatest threats came from within his own family. When Akbar died, the empire did not collapse, but it held its breath. King Jahangir ascended the throne in 1605, fully aware that many doubted him. Courtiers whispered. Nobles remembered his rebellion. Enemies waited for weakness. The crown he wore was heavy with expectation. To secure his rule, King Jahangir moved swiftly. He rewarded loyalty. He punished open defiance. And he made one thing clear: this was not Akbar's reign continued. This was King Jahangir's rule. Yet inside the palace walls, the emperor carried a quiet fear. What if he was remembered only as Akbar's son? To survive, King Jahangir would need more than authority. He would need legitimacy. King Jahangir understood something crucial: empires are not held by armies alone. He declared himself the guardian of justice. Outside his palace, he installed the legend king airy chain of justice, physical chain anyone could pull if they believed they had been wronged. No guards, no officials, only the emperor himself. It was a bold promise and a dangerous one. Every tug of the chain challenged King Jahangir to live up to his word, to judge fairly even against the powerful. Under his rule, Akbar's administrative system remained strong. Corruption was punished. Order was maintained. Justice became King Jahangir's identity. But justice has enemies. And not all of them stand outside the court. Though not obsessed with conquest, King Jahangir could not escape conflict. Rebellions flared, territories needed control, and the greatest threat of all came from someone he trusted: his own son. Prince Khurram, later known as Shah Jahan, rose in rebellion, driven by ambition and impatience. Father and son stood on opposite sides of power. The empire trembled. King Jahangir suppressed revolts with firm authority, determined to preserve stability. Each rebellion reminded him of his own past defiance against Akbar. History was repeating itself, and King Jahangir stood at its center. Power does not always sit on the throne, it often stands beside it. Nur Jahan, King Jahangir's wife, was unlike any empress before her. Intelligent, decisive, and fearless, she became deeply involved in administration and court politics. Coins bore her name, orders carried her authority. Foreign ambassadors recognized her power. To some, she was a stabilizing force. To others, a shadow ruler. Together, King Jahangir and Nur Jahan formed one of the most powerful partnerships in Mughal history, marking a rare period where a woman openly shaped imperial policy. But power shared is power questioned. While internal challenges brewed, new forces arrived from distant shores. European traders, most notably the English East India Company, entered King Jahangir's world, seeking trade and favor. King Jahangir welcomed diplomacy. Trade expanded. The Mughal Empire's global presence grew, but these encounters planted seeds whose consequences would be felt long after King Jahangir's death. Empires do not always fall by swords. Sometimes they open the door themselves. King Jahangir's true passion was not war, it was beauty. Under his patronage, Mughal miniature painting reached its peak. Art became detailed, emotional, and vivid. Nature, court life, and human expression flourished on parchment. Literature thrived, architecture refined elegance over grandeur. His court became a place where creativity was power. In an age of steel and blood, King Jahangir chose the brush and the pen. King Jahangir was complex, refined yet firm, merciful yet authoritative, curious, artistic, and deeply aware of his own flaws. He did not chase endless conquest. He sought balance. Justice was his shield. Culture was his legacy, and restraint defined his rule. He ruled not as a conqueror, but as a custodian. King Jahangir died in 1627. He left behind a stable, wealthy empire ready for his son Shah Jahan, who would raise monuments that touched the sky. History remembers King Jahangir not for expansion, but for order, justice, and refinement. He stood between Akbar's greatness and Shah Jahan's glory, a ruler of conscience in an age of ambition. King Shah legacy of blood and marble in 1628. King Shah Mughal Empire was at its King Shah height, vast, wealthy and dazzling. Its foundations were laid by Akbar, fortified by Jahangir, and now passed to his son. Shahabuddin Muhammad Khurram, known to history as Shah Jahan. King Shah was born into luxury, but wealth is a double-edged sword. King Shah, throne King Shah in King Sharit, was coveted, fragile, and surrounded by ambition, even from within his own bloodline. Shah Jahan's story is one of contrasts: love and power, creation and destruction, ambition and vulnerability. King Shah would build marvels that defied time, yet experience betrayal that shattered his world. To understand him, we must see not just King Shah Emperor, but King Shah man behind King Shah crown. King Shah I, who transformed grief into marble, art into legacy, and ambition into history. Accession to King Shah, throne 1628, a crown claimed through fire. King Shah Jahangir died in 1627. Shah Jahan faced immediate threats: rival broking Shahs, jealous nobles, and ambitious generals tested his claim. His youth and reputation as a warrior were scrutinized. Shah Jahan acted decisively through military skill, strategic alliances, and King Shah resolve. King Shah consolidated power and proclaimed himself emperor in 1628, but every step was a risk. One miscalculation could mean death or exile. King Shah court whispered of betrayal. King Shah streets waited, and in King Shah shadows, ambition moved like a predator. Shah Jahan learned early that to rule is to survive. King Shah crown was both a gift and a trap, and every victory came with danger. Administration and governance, King Shah balance of order, Shah Jahan inking, Shah righted a well-loyaled administration from his faking Shah. But managing an empire was more than following systems. It was about commanding loyalty, enforcing law, and maintaining fear and respect in equal measure. Experienced nobles managed provinces, but Shah Jahan oversaw revenue, justice, and trade personally. Law and order became his domain, and stability was his obsession. Yet governance carried unseen dangers. A wrong decision could spark rebellion. Loyalty was fragile. Every action weakening shod King Shahaveli on an emperor whose enemies were not always visible. Power demanded vigilance, and Shah Jahan what King shod always military campaigns and challenges empire on King Shah edge. Though King Shah preferred art over war, Shah Jahan could not ignore threats. Rebellions erupted among nobles and provincial rulers. King Shah empires, Su King Shah, Front King Shah Deccan required careful campaigns to ensure Mughal dominance. Internal family tensions added to King Shah danger. Even his sons harbored ambition that could ignite conflict. Shah Jahan fought decisively, balancing mercy and ruthlessness. Every victory secured his empire, yet reminded him bloodlines are both foundation and threat. King Shah was a ruler who understood that survival meant not just winning battles, but controlling King Shah's minds and ambitions inside his palace walls. Architecture and cultural achievements, marble, art, and immortality. Shah Jahan's true power was creation. King Shah Red Fort in Delhi stood as both fortress and palace, a testament to imperial strength. King Shah Jama Masjid displayed religious devotion and architectural mastery. And King Shah Taj Mahal, born of grief and love for Mumtaz Mahal, became a monument to eternity itself. Mughal painting, flourishing shod under his patronage. Gardens, mosques, and palaces reflected Persian elegance fused with Indian craftsmanship. Every brick, every carving, every painting was a statement. History will remember me. But creation came with obsession. Building demanded resources, labor, and attention displacing priorities, inflaming envy, and deepening palace intrigues. Shah Jahan's empire was not just ruled, it was crafted into legend. Personal life and Mumtaz Mahal love and loss that shaped an empire. Shah Jahan's greatest passion was his wife, Mumtaz Mahal. King Shah's love was intense, personal, and public an inspiration to King Shah Empire. King Shan's King Shah died in childbirth. Shah Jahan's grief became monumental. King Shah Taj Mahal rose not as a fortress or administrative center, but as an eternal tribute to love. Every marble dome and inlaid jewel reflected pain, devotion, and longing. King Shah Emperor's private sorrow became King Shah public marvel. Yet even in grief, King Shah ruled. Pain did not paralyze King Shah Empire, it fueled it, blending human emotion with political duty. Its later years and decline. King Shah's son, who betrayed power breeds ambition, and ambition often betrays. Shah Jahan's later years were marred by conflict with his sons, particularly Aurangzeb, who coveted King Shah's throne. Rebellion erupted, splitting King Shah Empire and forcing Shah Jahan into isolation. But in 1658, King Shahman, who had built wonders and controlled an empire, was imprisoned in Agra Fort, a shadow of King Shah Emperor King Shah once was. King Shah walls that once echoed with power became his prison. From King Shah could see King Shah Taj Mahal, King Shah monument of his greatest love, yet unable to move beyond his confinement. History often writes in contrast, power and confinement, glory and loss, death and legacy, immortality. In Marble Shah Jahan died in 1666, leaving a world transformed. King Shah was not remembered only for conquest or governance. His legacy was beauty, art, love, and architectural brilliance. Every visitor to India can still witness his vision. King Shah Taj Mahal, Red Fort, and countless palaces. King Shah bridged King Shah Mughal grandeur of Akbar and King Shah architectural zenith of his successors. Shah Jahan's story is a reminder. Even amidst betrayal, ambition, and loss, human passion can create immortality. But The shadow of the throne, King Aurangzeb, was born into power, wealth, and expectation, the son of Shah Jahan and grandson of Jahangir. He grew up in a world of marble palaces, gardens, and courtly intrigue, but also of rivalry and danger. From an early age, King Aurangzeb understood a simple truth. Blood ties are fragile, ambition is deadly, and the crown waits for no one. He was different from his predecessors, where Akbar had embraced tolerance and culture, and Shah Jahan had turned grief into marble. King Aurangzeb would embrace austerity, discipline, and uncompromising authority. His reign would stretch the Mughal Empire to its largest territorial extent, yet sow the seeds of its eventual decline. His story is a tale of ambition, internal struggle, faith, and consequence. A ruler who walked the thin line between greatness and obsession. Ascension to the throne, 1658. Blood on marble. The death of Shah Jahan ignited a war of succession. King Aurangzeb faced his brothers, including the intellectual and charismatic Dera Shikoh, in a battle of blood and strategy. Ruthless, calculated, and relentless, King Aurangzeb emerged victorious. He imprisoned his father in Agra fort, taking the throne by force and fear. But victory came at a cost. His rise exposed the fragile nature of loyalty. Soldiers, nobles, and even family could betray with a whisper or a blade. The weight of power settled heavily on his shoulders, a crown forged from ambition and blood. Even as emperor, King Aurangzeb knew that every day was a battle for survival, both against enemies and against the temptations that could undermine his strict discipline. And King Aurangzeb maintained a centralized Mughal administration, enforcing law, order, and revenue collection with uncompromising rigor. He relied on provincial governors, subadars, for regional control, but demanded strict loyalty and performance. Any hint of corruption or dissent was met with swift action. Unlike his grandfather Akbar or father Shah Jahan, King Aurangzeb attempted to enforce Islamic law across the empire, reflecting his personal piety. His austere policies alienated some, but strengthened the image of a ruler who would not bend for anyone. Yet governance was a tightrope. Even small errors could spark rebellion. King Aurangzeb knew that the throne is secured not by mercy alone, but by vigilance, fear, and absolute discipline, military campaigns and expansion. The empire stretched to its limits. King Aurangzeb's ambition was territorial as well as ideological. He expanded the empire to its largest territorial extent, conquering the Deccan sultanates and consolidating southern India under Mughal authority. But the campaigns were endless. Marathas' local rulers and regional rebellions constantly threatened stability. The emperor was always on the move, balancing war, administration, and suppression of revolt. The military victories secured his power, yet also strained resources and manpower. Every conquest came with the heavy cost of blood and loyalty. King Aurangzeb's life became a relentless rhythm of war and vigilance, a ruler who never truly rested. Religious policy, orthodoxy over tolerance. King Aurangzeb was a devout Sunni Muslim. His religious policies were a sharp contrast to Akbar's tolerance. Reintroduced jizya tax on non-Muslims, enforced Islamic law more strictly than any previous Mughal ruler, destroyed some temples. Though others were spared under officials' discretion, religion was not just belief, was power, control, and order. King Aurangzeb believed the empire's strength depended on obedience to law and faith. Yet these policies sparked tension and resentment. Religious orthodoxy became a tool of authority, but also a source of rebellion, laying seeds for future fragmentation of the empire. Personal life and character, the austerity of an emperor. Unlike Shah Jahan, King Aurangzeb avoided luxury. His life was pious, disciplined, and austere. He spent long hours in prayer, study of Islamic law, and supervision of governance. He valued loyalty, order, and duty above pleasure, art, or cultural indulgence. His personal austerity reinforced his authority, yet also isolated him from allies and family. King Aurangzeb's personality reflected his reign: strict, relentless, principled, and polarizing. He was admired for devotion and strength, yet feared for severity and uncompromising rule. Later years and decline, empire of strain and rebellion by the late 1680s. King Aurangzeb's empire was overspread. Continuous campaigns in the Deccan and rebellions from the Marathas drained resources. Internal dissent simmered among nobles and provincial rulers. The empire, while vast, became fragile under the weight of constant war and harsh policies. King Aurangzeb spent his final years managing revolt and religious tension, rarely leaving the battlefield of governance. The emperor's life had become a ceaseless struggle to maintain order, loyalty, and faith across an empire that could no longer rest. Death and legacy, ambition and consequence. King Aurangzeb died in 1707, leaving a Mughal empire that was vast but vulnerable. His policies and constant warfare accelerated internal fragmentation despite territorial gains. He is remembered as a devout, ambitious, and polarizing ruler, a man who expanded the empire to its greatest size but imposed austerity and orthodoxy at a cost. King Aurangzeb's life is a cautionary tale. Ambition, rigor, and conviction can achieve immense power, yet also plant the seeds of decline. His story resonates as a dark, thrilling narrative of human ambition, risk, and consequence. Shadow of succession. Bahadur Shah, the first and the fractured empire when a great emperor dies. His crown becomes a prize, and the empire trembles under the ambitions of sons, generals, and shadows, who will claim the throne, and at what cost. Aurangzeb's death, the end of an era. The sun rose over the Deccan Plateau in early 1707, its golden light falling on a world that had known decades of relentless conquest. Aurangzeb, the emperor who had expanded the Mughal Empire to its greatest territorial reach, lay on his deathbed. His body, worn from 50 years of campaigns and austerity, was a stark contrast to the palaces he left behind, marble halls echoing with the memory of power. Gardens once vibrant, now shadowed by exhaustion. Around him, his sons paced nervously. Bahadur Shah, eldest and experienced, understood the weight of the empire's legacy. Azam Shah, ambitious and impatient, believed the crown was rightfully his. And in the wings, other princes, quietly scheming, waited for opportunity. Every whisper, every glance carried the tension of imminent conflict. The battle for the crown, Azam Shah declared himself emperor in the Deccan, raising banners and summoning armies loyal to his name. Meanwhile, Bahadur Shah rallied his forces from the north, marching south with the determination of a man who knew that victory meant survival, not just for himself, but for the empire he hoped to preserve. The two brothers met at Jazau, a dusty field under a merciless sun. The air was thick with anticipation. Cavalry clashed, cannon roared, and arrows arced like deadly rain. Soldiers on both sides fought not only for victory, but for the legacy of an empire that could vanish with a single defeat. In the chaos, Azam Shah fell, and his army scattered. Bahadur Shah emerged victorious, bloodied but resolute. Yet this victory was bittersweet. The empire he inherited was fractured, exhausted, and vulnerable. And his triumph did little to restore the authority that had begun to slip from Delhi. Upon his coronation, Bahadur Shah, I faced the enormous task of holding an empire together while governing through shadows. Provincial governors in Bengal, Awadh, and the Deccan had tasted independence during the succession struggle. Some were loyal in name only, sending tribute irregularly and acting as autonomous rulers. Even within his family, rival princes lingered as reminders of the throne's fragility. Nobles who had supported Azam Shah now recalibrated, pledging cautious allegiance to Bahadur Shah, each move measured and calculated. Delhi, the heart of the empire, retained its grandeur, marble halls, gardens, and grand ceremonies, but power had already begun to drift away from the center, while Bahadur Shah managed to restore a semblance of stability. The empire's vast territories could not be ruled directly. Governors, generals, and local leaders began building independent power bases. In Bengal, Awadh, and the Deccan autonomous states emerged quietly, setting the stage for the rise of the Marathas, Nawabs, and Rajputs. The emperor's victories at Jazau ensured a fragile order, but the empire's heart was no longer as strong as its titles suggested. The Mughal crown was now more a symbol of tradition than command its glow, overshadowed by the ambitions of those who would shape India's future outside Delhi's walls. Bahadur Shah I held the crown, but the empire had begun to drift. Power had moved into the hands of governors, generals, and the ambitious Marathas rising in the Deccan. History teaches us that authority is more than a crownet, is the recognition of loyalty, strength, and respect. Even the most glorious empires can fracture from within when the shadow of succession falls. He ruled one of the greatest empires in the world, yet rarely set foot outside his palace. For Muhammad Shah Rangila, music, color, and desire were the empire, and its fate would follow him inside. Delhi's sun poured through the lattice windows of the Red Fort, illuminating courtyards alive with the scent of jasmine and rosewater. In one hall, silk banners swayed to the rhythm of sitars. In another, poets whispered verses of longing and valor. At the center of it all, Muhammad Shah Rangila reclined on a gilded divan, a cup of rose wine in hand, watching dancers twist and twirl like living flames. The emperor's eyes, half-lidded with pleasure, missed little. Every note of music, every ripple of silk, every smile or glance of the courtiers around him. Unlike his predecessors, Rangila rarely ventured beyond palace walls. He delegated governance to ministers and nobles, trusting in rituals, correspondence, and edicts, while the empire outside slowly shifted beneath his neglect. His days were measured by pleasure, culture, and indulgence. Women, music, poetry, and the vivid color of courtly life were his true empire. The outside world, the revolts, the provincial governors, the looming threats, felt distant and unreal, like whispers in the corridors. Accounts from contemporary chroniclers paint a palace both dazzling and decadent. Stories tell of Rangila openly enjoying the company of dancers and attendants, of evenings spent in private courts that seemed to hum with life and secrecy. Laughter and song echoed through the halls, while the empire's fate teetered precariously on distant battlefields and council chambers. Yet indulgence came at a cost. Governors grew restless, factions at court maneuvered secretly, and whispers of weakness spread across India. The emperor's absence from decisive action left the Mughal Empire exposed. In 1739, that fragility was cruelly revealed when Nader Shah of Persia invaded Delhi. Smoke rose above the city. Streets ran with terror, and treasures, including the famed peacock throne, were plundered. The women, poets, and musicians Rangila adored were displaced or killed. The empire's heart had been laid bare, and the emperor could do little but watch from his palace walls. Despite tragedy, the human spirit endured. Artists preserved miniature paintings of courts and celebrations. Music continued in hidden chambers, and survivors rebuilt lives amidst ruins. Rangila's obsession with pleasure, while criticized, had also nurtured a cultural flowering that would outlive military defeats. His reign became a paradox. Politically weak, yet culturally immortal, a reminder that even indulgence can create lasting beauty. Muhammad Shah Rangila's story is a lesson in contrasts. An emperor can be both brilliant and flawed, vibrant and blind to peril, indulgent yet capable of creating enduring legacy. Delhi may have burned under invasion and political power waned, but in the echoes of music, poetry, and art, the colors of Rangila's world persisted. His palace, filled with laughter, song, and desire, was a sanctuary for the human impulse to create, to enjoy, and to survive. Closing reflection, 1020 sect. The walls of Delhi's palaces eventually grew silent. Yet the traces of Rangila's pleasures lingered in paintings, music, and poetry that survived the empire's collapse. Power can vanish, armies can fall, and empires crumble, but the human love for beauty, desire, and creation endures. Muhammad Shah Rangila may have ruled in indulgence, but he left a timeless reminder, even in decadence, culture. And the human spirit can shine brightest against the shadow of history. Muhammad Shah Rangila inherited an empire already hollowed by ambition and betrayal, yet he chose to rule through sensation, refinement, and beauty rather than force. From the moment he ascended the throne, his attention drifted toward movement, voice, color, and the living presence of cultivated adult femininity. The Red Fort became less a seat of governance and more a carefully curated world where elegance could still be controlled. Rangila's gaze lingered not with haste but with intensity, studying posture, breath, and intention in every performance. Zeenat Begum's disciplined movements embodied youthful vitality sharpened by mastery, commanding attention through precision rather than innocence. Her confidence reflected a strength Rangila admired deeply, because it existed without armies or decrees. Each measured step and deliberate pause reassured him that order could still exist somewhere within his reach. Alia Khanum's voice offered a different refuge, weaving restraint and longing into melodies that quieted his restless mind. Rangila listened beyond sound, absorbing silences and undertones that mirrored his unspoken fears. These women became anchors, stabilizing his emotions as the political world beyond palace walls unraveled. Reports of rebellious governors reached him daily, yet they struggled to compete with the immediacy of beauty before his eyes. He did not deny the empire's decay, but he chose immersion over confrontation. Each night, he commissioned grander performances, believing refinement might delay inevitable collapse. Desire for beauty slowly transformed into dependence as sensation replaced strategy in his priorities. Rangila favored women who combined allure with intellect, presence with restraint, and elegance with self-command. He surrounded himself with art because art still obeyed him when men no longer did. The palace glowed brighter as the nation darkened, becoming an island detached from consequence. Rangila mistook control over aesthetics for control over destiny. Zeenat Begum's performances grew more intricate, mirroring the emperor's need for perfection amid instability. Alia Khanum's poetry carried unspoken warnings, yet Rangila received them as comfort rather than counsel. Courtiers adapted to this rhythm, learning that beauty earned favor more reliably than wisdom. Time passed not in seasons of governance, but in cycles of music, dance, and admiration. Rangila's fascination became ritual, repeated nightly as a shield against reality. The empire's borders weakened, while the palace interiors grew increasingly elaborate. When whispers of Nader Shah's advance reached Delhi, Rangila responded with denial wrapped in elegance. He ordered richer silks, brighter lamps, and longer performances, as if intensity could erase threat. The illusion shattered when invasion finally arrived with fire, steel, and merciless certainty. Music fell silent as screams replaced melody throughout the city. Rangila watched helplessly as the world he avoided confronting consumed the world he adored. Nader Shah's conquest stripped away luxury without hesitation or reverence. The palace lost its glow, revealing emptiness beneath ornamentation. Rangila's power dissolved in moments, exposing the cost of prolonged retreat. Zenat Begum fled with memory rather than jewels, carrying discipline where wealth could not follow. Alia Khanum preserved song through silence, refusing to let voice be erased by terror. After devastation, survivors returned not to rebuild thrones, but to rebuild meaning. Art re-emerged quietly, sustained by those who remembered its discipline. Rangila remained alive, yet forever altered by the collapse he witnessed too late. Stripped of authority, he finally understood the fragility of the world he curated. Beauty survived not because of his power, but because of human resilience. The women he elevated became vessels of continuity rather than indulgence. Dance transformed into teaching, song into remembrance, poetry into endurance. Rangila's obsession revealed its final form as regret tempered by understanding. He realized culture must be guarded, not hidden behind walls of denial. The empire no longer responded to him, but its memory still did. History would condemn his choices without mercy. Yet history rarely measures what survives beyond conquest. Rangila's reign demonstrated that power can vanish while identity persists. What he escaped through desire later escaped destruction through memory. The collapse revealed the difference between possession and preservation. Rangila had possessed beauty, but others preserved it. Empires built on dominance crumble loudly and quickly. Cultures built on discipline endure quietly and stubbornly. Rangila's fascination unintentionally nurtured that discipline. His court became a seed rather than a sanctuary. Though weakened, the Mughal spirit survived through art rather than arms. Rangila's failure as a ruler contrasted sharply with his impact as a patron. Desire guided his gaze, but legacy followed his unintended consequences. Beauty outlived ambition because it belonged to people, not power. Rangila witnessed survival where he expected only loss. The women he admired became the keepers of what mattered. Through them, identity resisted erasure. Rangila learned too late that escapism shapes history as surely as conquest. His indulgence delayed action but preserved memory. Collapse exposed truth without cruelty or comfort. The emperor faded, but the culture refused to follow. Rangila's name endured not through victory, but through contradiction. He embodied weakness entwined with preservation. His obsession revealed humanity beneath the crown. In seeking beauty, he revealed vulnerability. In vulnerability, culture found space to survive. Rangila's story warns against retreat while celebrating resilience. His reign became a lesson written in art rather than law. Desire distracted him, yet desire also nurtured memory. The empire vanished, but its spirit lingered. Rangila's palace fell silent, yet echoes remained. Those echoes shaped generations beyond his lifetime. Rangila's flaw became his paradoxical contribution. He failed to defend land, but preserved identity. Beauty became resistance when power collapsed. The emperor's gaze shaped survival unintentionally. What he loved survived him. What he ruled did not. Rangila's legacy rests not on conquest, but continuity. Empires fall loudly, but culture whispers forever. Muhammad Shah Rangila remains remembered through art that outlived his throne. His story proves that obsession can destroy authority, yet preserve humanity. Desire blinded the ruler, but nourished the civilization. In collapse, beauty found permanence. Rangila lost everything except the memory that refused to die.
If this story made you pause for a moment, subscribe for more stories that matter.
Aurangzeb's death in 1707 left the Mughal Empire at its largest territorial extent. Yet it was weakened and exhausted. Decades of relentless military campaigns drained the treasury, left provincial governors emboldened, and created a power vacuum in the heart of the empire. His successors inherited a kingdom full of rebellions, court intrigue, and ambition-driven nobles, where loyalty was fleeting and trust was a dangerous gamble. The Mughal throne, once a symbol of unchallenged authority, now became a battleground of cunning and cruelty. Brothers and nephews would vie for control. Nobles manipulated emperors like chess pieces, and even the emperor himself could be powerless in the face of political scheming. The empire's structure, built over a century by Babur, Humayun, Akbar, and Shah Jahan, now teetered on the edge of collapse. This era is a stark reminder that power is fragile. Ambition, when unchecked by wisdom and loyalty, can corrode even the mightiest dynasty. The narrative sets the stage for a story of human struggle. Rulers balancing ambition with reality, authority against rebellion, and legacy against mortality. The Mughal Empire's decline is not just about kings and battles, it as about the perilous human cost of ruling an empire. King Bahadur Shah, the first 1707 to 1712, the consolidator Bahadur Shah I, also known as Shah Alam, was Aurangzeb's son, inheriting a fractured empire. From the moment Aurangzeb died, he faced bloody succession wars against his brothers, all claiming the throne. Victory came through strategy and alliances, but the scars of civil war remained. Once Emperor Bahadur Shah I attempted to restore stability. He balanced religious factions, reconciled rebellious nobles, and tried to secure loyalty from provincial governors. However, centuries of centralized authority were beginning to crumble. The distant provinces, long under semi-autonomous governors, saw opportunity in the transition of power. His reign was also challenged by Sikh uprisings and Rajput revolts, testing his military and diplomatic skills. While his efforts were moderately successful in consolidating power, the challenges revealed the limits of even a capable ruler. Bahadur Shah I's reign embodies the human struggle of leadership, the relentless balancing act between ambition and reality, authority and rebellion. Despite his efforts, the empire was weakened from within, setting a precedent for short, unstable reigns that followed. The grandeur of the Mughal throne was still present, but the cracks were widening, exposing vulnerabilities that his successors would inherit. King Jahandar Shah 1712-1713, the weak pawn. Jahandar Shah, grandson of Aurangzeb, ascended the throne after Bahadur Shah I's death but ruled for less than a year. His reign was dominated by favorites and courtiers, particularly Zulfikar Khan, who effectively controlled the administration. Jahandar Shah was more figurehead than emperor, indulging in pleasures while the empire's true governance lay in the hands of manipulative nobles. The court became a hotbed of intrigue and corruption, with ambitious ministers exploiting the emperor's weaknesses. Jahandar Shah's inability to assert authority led to chaos, opportunistic revolts, and eroded loyalty. Eventually, he was overthrown and executed by his nephew, Farrukhsiyar, demonstrating that unchecked ambition without wisdom is a fast track to destruction. This short, disastrous reign highlights the peril of weak leadership in a fragile empire. The narrative emphasizes suspense and internal struggle, a ruler trapped by his own inadequacies, courtiers wielding real power, and the ever-present danger of betrayal. King Farrukhsiyar 1713 sampai 1719, puppet of power. Farrukhsiyar was placed on the throne by the Sayyid brothers, who acted as kingmakers. While he officially ruled, the true power rested with these nobles, demonstrating the empire's transition from emperor-centered to minister-dominated governance. Farrukhsiyar attempted to assert independence, but conspiracies and internal rebellions prevented him from consolidating authority. His reign exposes the fragility of symbolic power. An emperor could command armies and issue decrees, but real control lay in the hands of the ambitious few behind the throne. In 1719, Farrukhsiyar was assassinated, continuing the cycle of short, turbulent reigns. His story underscores suspense, intrigue, and the dangerous consequences of ambition in a decaying court where loyalty was fleeting and life was fragile. King Bahadur Shah II, Bahadur Shah Zafar, 1837 to 1857, the last emperor centuries later. The Mughal Empire was reduced to a faded shadow of its former glory. Bahadur Shah Zafar, a poet and patron of the arts, ruled under the shadow of the British East India Company. His authority was largely symbolic, a relic of a once mighty dynasty. During the 1857 revolt, Zafar became a figurehead of resistance, embodying the empire's lingering prestige. However, he had no real military power, and the rebellion's failure led to his capture, exile to Rangoon, and death in 1858. His story represents the tragic cost of ambition without control, the weight of legacy, and the end of an era. Zafar's reign is poignant, a cultured, artistic soul trapped in a crumbling empire. It highlights suspense, tension, and the human struggle between hope, honor, and inevitability. Legacy lessons from decline. The post-Aurangzeb emperors demonstrate that empires crumble without capable leadership. Weak successors, ambitious nobles, regional rebellions, and external pressures fractured the Mughal Empire. The story is a human one. Ambition unchecked by wisdom leads to betrayal and decline. It foreshadows the rise of British colonial rule in India. The once mighty Mughal throne became a symbol of fragile authority, teaching timeless lessons about leadership, loyalty, and the consequences of power lost.